I'm Rebecca, and at 28 years old, I never imagined that inheriting my uncle's beautiful Victorian mansion would turn my siblings into my greatest enemies. When Uncle Theodore passed away last month and left me his $2.3 million estate, my brother Marcus and sister Vivian showed up at my door 3 days later with a fake will and eviction papers. What they didn't know was that Uncle Theodore had been planning for this exact scenario for years. If you're watching this from somewhere where family greed has torn your loved ones apart, take a moment to like and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to hear how I turned their own scheme against them. Before I dive into this wild story, let me paint you a picture of how this all began. Growing up, I was always the black sheep of the Whitmore family. While Marcus, now 31, was the golden child who could do no wrong, and Vivian, 29, was the princess who got everything she wanted, I was the quiet one who found solace in books and art. Our parents, Robert and Patricia Whitmore, owned a successful chain of hardware stores across New England, but their love always seemed conditional on achievement and appearances. The only person who ever truly understood me was my father's older brother, Theodore. Uncle Theo, as I called him, was an eccentric bachelor who had made his fortune in real estate development during the 1980s and 90s. He lived alone in a magnificent 1890s Victorian mansion on Maple Hill, the most exclusive neighborhood in our town of Millbrook, Connecticut. The house was his pride and joy: 4 stories, 12 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, original hardwood floors, and a tower room where he kept his extensive library. While my siblings found Uncle Theo weird and boring, I was fascinated by his stories of building his empire from nothing. Every Sunday after church, while Marcus was at baseball practice and Vivian was at dance lessons, I would bike over to Uncle Theo's house. We'd spend hours in his tower library, where he taught me about literature, history, and most importantly, how to think for myself. He never married or had children, claiming that his properties and books were a legacy enough. Rebecca, he used to say as we sat by the fireplace in his study, intelligence and integrity are the only things in this world that can't be taken from you. Remember that when people try to make you feel small. I treasured those words, especially during high school when my siblings' popularity made my quieter nature seem like a character flaw to my parents. After graduation, I followed my passion for art history and earned my degree from Yale. Uncle Theo was the only family member who attended my graduation, beaming with pride as I walked across the stage. He helped me secure an internship at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, where I eventually landed a full-time position as a junior curator. For the past 5 years, I'd been building my career in the city, visiting Uncle Theo monthly and cherishing our long phone conversations about art, books, and life. Marcus, meanwhile, had joined our father's business straight out of college and was being groomed to take over the company. He married his college girlfriend, Stephanie, and they lived in a McMansion in the newer part of town with their twin boys. Vivian had bounced between various jobs: marketing coordinator, event planner, boutique manager, never quite finding her calling, but always managing to look perfect doing it. She'd recently gone through a messy divorce that left her financially strapped, though she hid it well behind designer clothes and expensive lunches. Our family dynamics had remained relatively stable until last year, when Uncle Theo was diagnosed with lung cancer. Despite never being a smoker, the disease progressed rapidly. I took leave from work to help care for him during his final months, spending weeks at a time at the mansion, managing his medications, accompanying him to treatments, and simply being present as his strength faded. Marcus and Vivian visited sporadically, always with excuses about work obligations or family commitments. When they did come, their conversations invariably turned to practical matters: Uncle Theo's finances, his properties, what would happen to everything when he was gone. I found their lack of genuine concern heartbreaking, but Uncle Theo seemed unsurprised. "They see dollar signs, not a dying man," he confided to me one evening as we watched the sunset from his bedroom window. "But you, Rebecca, you see me. That makes all the difference." 3 weeks before he passed, Uncle Theo asked me to drive him to his attorney's office in town. I assumed he was updating his medical directives or handling some business matter. The meeting lasted 2 hours, during which I sat in the waiting room reading magazines and worrying about how tired he looked. When we returned home, Uncle Theo seemed more at peace than he'd been in months. "I've taken care of everything," he said with a mysterious smile. "You don't need to worry about anything after I'm gone." I pressed him for details, but he just patted my hand and said we'd discuss it later. That later never came. Uncle Theo passed peacefully in his sleep on a Tuesday morning in October. The funeral was beautiful, held at St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, where our family had attended for generations. The entire congregation was there. Uncle Theo had been beloved in our community for his quiet generosity and support of local causes. I delivered the eulogy, sharing stories of his kindness, his wisdom, and his passion for preserving the town's historic architecture. Marcus and Vivian sat stone-faced in the front pew, occasionally dabbing their eyes with tissues in what seemed like performed grief. After the service, Uncle Theo's attorney, Mr. James Patterson, approached me. "Rebecca, I need to schedule a meeting with you and your siblings for the reading of your uncle's will. Would Thursday at 2 p.m. work?" I nodded, assuming this would be a straightforward affair, maybe small remembrances for each of us, with the bulk of his estate going to charity as he'd sometimes mentioned. Thursday arrived, and we gathered in Mr. Patterson's wood-paneled office downtown. Marcus wore his most serious business suit, while Vivian had dressed in appropriate morning attire that somehow still managed to be fashion-forward. I felt underdressed in my simple black dress, but I'd been too emotionally drained to worry about appearances. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat and began reading the formal language of the will. There were small bequests to various charities, $50,000 to the local historical society, $25,000 to the library, $100,000 to the Cancer Research Foundation. Then came the personal items. Marcus received Uncle Theo's collection of antique tools and his workshop equipment. Vivian inherited his jewelry collection, including several valuable pieces that had belonged to our grandmother. I expected my name to come up next with perhaps some books or artwork. Instead, Mr. Patterson paused, looked directly at me, and continued, "To my beloved niece, Rebecca Ann Whitmore, who has been like a daughter to me and who alone among my family showed me true love and devotion during my final months. I leave the entirety of my remaining estate. This includes my residence at 47 Maple Hill Drive, complete with all furnishings and personal property therein, as well as my investment portfolio valued at approximately $800,000 at the time of this will's execution." The silence in the room was deafening. I felt as though I'd been struck by lightning. Marcus's face turned red, then white, then red again. Vivian's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "I'm sorry," Marcus finally sputtered, "but there must be some mistake. The house alone is worth over $2 million. You're telling me Theodore left everything to Rebecca?" Mr. Patterson nodded calmly. "The will is quite clear and legally binding. It was updated just 3 weeks before your uncle's death, witnessed by 2 of my associates, and properly notarized. Rebecca is now the sole owner of the Maple Hill property and all associated assets." Vivian found her voice then, shrill with indignation. "This is ridiculous. Rebecca barely visited him over the years. We all know she was just sucking up to him because he was sick. This has to be elder abuse or something." "Actually," Mr. Patterson replied dryly, consulting his notes, "your uncle specifically mentioned anticipating such accusations. He included a detailed letter explaining his reasoning, along with documentation of every visit, phone call, and act of care Rebecca provided during his illness. He was quite thorough." As we left the law office, Marcus grabbed my arm in the parking lot. "We need to talk about this as a family," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "This isn't right, Rebecca. You know it isn't right. What's not right about Uncle Theo leaving his property to whomever he chose?" I asked, genuinely confused by their reaction. "He always said he'd take care of us, and he did. You both received generous gifts." "Generous gifts?" Vivian practically screamed. "Some old jewelry and workshop tools while you get a mansion worth millions? You manipulated a sick old man." "I loved him," I said quietly. "I was there for him when he needed someone. That's not manipulation, that's family." We'll see about that, Marcus muttered as they stalked away to their respective cars. That night, I drove to the mansion for the first time as its owner. Standing in the grand foyer with its crystal chandelier and mahogany staircase, I felt overwhelmed by the responsibility and the memories. Every room held traces of Uncle Theo, his favorite reading chair by the window, the chess set we'd played on during his final weeks, the family photographs spanning decades of Whitmore history. In his study, I found the letter Mr. Patterson had mentioned, along with a thick folder labeled "For Rebecca, Important." Inside was Uncle Theo's explanation for his decision, written in his careful handwriting. My dearest Rebecca, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you've inherited more than you ever expected. I want you to understand that this decision wasn't made lightly or recently. For years, I've watched you grow into a woman of substance, intelligence, and genuine compassion. While your siblings have always seen me as a source of potential wealth, you've seen me as a person worth loving. During my final months, when I needed care and companionship most, you were there. You sacrificed your career progress, your social life, and your own comfort to ensure I wasn't alone. Marcus visited twice and spent both visits discussing business. Vivian came 4 times, 3 of which ended with her asking for money to help with her divorce expenses. But you, Rebecca, you were there dozens of times, not because you hoped to gain something, but because you loved me. The house needs someone who will cherish it as I have. The money needs someone who will use it wisely, not squander it on status symbols or risky investments. You are that person. I've also included documentation of everything you've done for me, because I suspect your siblings will not accept this gracefully. Remember what I taught you about integrity being the one thing no one can take from you. They will try, but you are stronger than you know. I love you like the daughter I never had. The folder also contained meticulous records, dates and times of my visits, photographs of me helping with his medications and household tasks, copies of get-well cards I'd sent, even printouts of our phone conversations' duration from his phone bill. Uncle Theo had been preparing for this battle long before I knew there would be one. For 3 days, I lived peacefully in the mansion, taking leave from work to process my grief and this unexpected inheritance. I spent time in each room, learning the house's rhythms and quirks, planning which spaces might need updating while preserving their historic character. The tower library became my refuge, just as it had been during childhood visits. On Saturday morning, as I sat in the breakfast nook with coffee and the newspaper, the doorbell rang. Through the beveled glass, I could see 2 figures on the porch. When I opened the door, I found Marcus and Vivian, both looking unusually formal and determined. "We need to talk," Marcus announced, pushing past me into the foyer without invitation. Vivian followed, her heels clicking loudly on the hardwood floors. "Good morning to you too," I said, closing the door behind them. "What's this about?" "It's about this absurd situation," Vivian replied, gesturing around the grand entrance hall. "We've been thinking, and we've decided that Uncle Theo's will needs to be contested. He clearly wasn't in his right mind when he made these changes." "Based on what evidence?" I asked, maintaining my calm despite their hostile energy. Marcus pulled out a folder of his own. "Based on this medical report showing he was on pain medication that could have affected his judgment. Based on witness testimony about your constant presence during his final months, which could constitute undue influence. Based on the fact that this will completely contradicts everything he told us over the years about leaving his estate to charity." I felt a chill run down my spine. They had done their homework. Uncle Theo was completely lucid when he made his decisions. Mr. Patterson can attest to that. "Patterson is just a small-town lawyer," Vivian sneered. "We've hired Harrison, Bradley, and Associates from Hartford. They specialize in estate litigation, and they're confident we can prove undue influence." "Look," Marcus continued, adopting a more conciliatory tone, "we don't want this to get ugly. We're family. So here's our proposal. Divide everything 3 ways, as it should have been from the beginning. You can keep living here if you want, but put the house in all our names. Split the investment portfolio equally. Everyone walks away happy." I stared at my siblings, seeing clearly for perhaps the first time how differently we viewed family, loyalty, and fairness. "And if I refuse? Then we contest the will in court," Marcus replied matter-of-factly. which will tie up the estate for years, cost everyone thousands in legal fees, and probably result in you losing everything anyway. Is that really what you want? What I want, I said slowly, is for you both to leave my house. Now. Vivian's mask of civility finally slipped. Your house? You arrogant little witch. You think you deserve all this because you played nursemaid for a few months? We're Theodore's family too. Yes, you are, I agreed. And he left you what he thought you deserved. If you choose to contest that decision, that's your right. But you won't intimidate me into giving up what he wanted me to have. We'll see about that, Marcus said, his business demeanor returning. Expect to hear from our lawyers soon. They left without another word, their footsteps echoing through the foyer like gunshots. That afternoon, I called Mr. Patterson and explained what had happened. He wasn't surprised. Your uncle anticipated this possibility, he said. That's why he was so meticulous in documenting everything. However, I should warn you that estate litigation can be expensive and emotionally draining. Are you prepared for that fight? I thought about Uncle Theo's letter, his faith in my integrity, his belief that I would protect what he'd built. Yes, I said. I am. The first salvo in their legal war came Tuesday morning via certified mail. A formal notice of contest claiming undue influence, lack of mental capacity, and improper execution of the will. The language was dense with legal terminology, but the message was clear. They were coming for everything. I immediately called the law firm Mr. Patterson had recommended for estate defense, Morrison and Clark, based in New Haven. Patricia Morrison, the senior partner, agreed to see me that afternoon. Her office was intimidating in its elegance, with floor-to-ceiling law books and oil portraits of stern-faced judges, but Ms. Morrison herself was warm and direct. I've reviewed the documents you brought, she said after examining Uncle Theo's file. Your uncle was remarkably thorough. This level of documentation is unusual and extremely helpful. However, I want you to understand what you're facing. Harrison, Bradley, and Associates are aggressive litigators. They'll try to paint you as a manipulative caregiver who took advantage of a vulnerable elderly man. They'll scrutinize every interaction you had with your uncle during his final months. But everything I did was out of love, I protested. I never asked him for anything. I believe you, Ms. Morrison said kindly. But proving that in court is different from living it. They'll argue that your constant presence during his illness gave you undue influence over his decisions. They'll claim he was vulnerable to manipulation because of his grief, his pain medication, and his isolation from other family members. The estimated cost for defending the will was staggering, potentially $150,000 or more if the case went to trial. Even winning would be expensive. I left her office feeling overwhelmed but determined. Uncle Theo had trusted me with his legacy. I wouldn't let my siblings destroy that trust. Over the next few weeks, the legal battle intensified. Harrison, Bradley, and Associates filed motion after motion, each one designed to delay probate and increase my legal costs. They requested medical records, demanded depositions from Uncle Theo's doctors, and even tried to subpoena my employment records to prove I had financial motives for manipulation. Meanwhile, my siblings launched a more personal campaign. They contacted extended family members, painting me as a gold digger who had isolated Uncle Theo from his real family. Cousins I barely knew suddenly had opinions about my character and motives. The gossip reached our small community, where people began whispering about the Whitmore estate battle. My parents' reaction was perhaps the most painful part. When I called to explain the situation, hoping for support, my mother's response was devastating. Rebecca, honey, you have to understand how this looks. Maybe Theodore did intend to leave you more, but surely he meant for you to share with Marcus and Vivian. They're his family too. What am I then? I asked, hurt beyond words. Of course your family, she said quickly. But Marcus has children to think about, and Vivian is struggling financially after her divorce. Couldn't you find a way to work this out without lawyers? Even my parents saw me as the unreasonable party for refusing to give up my inheritance. The isolation was crushing, but it also clarified something important. I was truly on my own in this fight. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While organizing Uncle Theo's papers, I discovered a hidden compartment in his desk, a secret drawer that opened when you pressed a specific carving in the woodwork. Inside were additional documents, copies of every check Marcus and Vivian had asked him for over the years, records of phone conversations, and most damning of all, a digital recorder with hours of audio files. Uncle Theo had been documenting my siblings' behavior for years. The recordings included conversations where Marcus discussed inheriting the house before Uncle Theo was even diagnosed with cancer. Vivian could be heard calculating the value of his art collection and discussing how to manage him into making her the executor of his estate. Most shocking of all was a recording from just 2 months before his death, where both siblings visited together and spent the entire time pressuring him to change his will to benefit them. "Theodore, you can't be serious about leaving everything to Rebecca." Vivian's voice was clear on the recording. "She doesn't need it. She has her career in New York. Marcus and I are the ones who really need help. Think about your great-nephew's college funds." Uncle Theo's response was weak but firm. "I'll leave my estate to whomever I believe will honor my memory and use it wisely." "But we're your real heirs," Marcus insisted. "Blood should count for something." "Blood means nothing without love," Uncle Theo replied. "Rebecca has shown me love. You've shown me greed." The recording ended with them leaving in anger, Marcus muttering about getting what's rightfully ours one way or another. I sat in the secret room, tears streaming down my face as I listened to Uncle Theo defending me against their manipulation attempts. He had been protecting me even then, gathering evidence for a battle he knew was coming. Ms. Morrison was thrilled when I brought her the new evidence. "This changes everything," she said, reviewing the recordings and documents. "These prove that your siblings had financial motives for wanting to inherit, while your motives were purely compassionate. The fact that your uncle secretly recorded these conversations shows he was aware of their intentions and was protecting himself and you against future challenges." The recordings were particularly damaging because they proved Marcus and Vivian had discussed contesting the will before Uncle Theo was even dead. Their lawsuit claimed they were shocked by his final wishes, but the evidence showed they had been planning legal action for months. Armed with this new evidence, Ms. Morrison filed a motion for summary judgment, arguing that my siblings' case was frivolous and designed only to harass me into settlement. She also filed a countersuit for tortious interference and intentional infliction of emotional distress, seeking damages for the pain they had caused during my grieving process. The effect was immediate. Harrison, Bradley, and Associates began backing down from their most aggressive tactics. They requested a settlement conference, clearly wanting to avoid having the recordings played in open court. The audio evidence made their clients look manipulative and greedy, exactly the opposite of their concerned family members' narrative. But my siblings weren't finished. When legal intimidation failed, they tried a different approach. Marcus showed up at the mansion one evening, alone and seemingly contrite. "Can we talk?" he asked when I opened the door. "Just brother and sister, no lawyers." Against my better judgment, I let him in. We sat in Uncle Theo's study, surrounded by the books and memories that had shaped my relationship with our uncle. "I know this has gotten out of hand," Marcus began. "The lawyers are making everything worse, turning us against each other when we should be grieving together. I miss Uncle Theo too, you know." "Do you?" I asked quietly. "Because the recordings suggest you saw him more as a bank account than a relative." Marcus flinched. "Those recordings were taken out of context." "Yes, Vivian and I discussed practical matters with him, but only because we were concerned about his future care. We wanted to make sure he had proper financial planning." "By pressuring him to change his will to benefit you?" "That's not." Marcus stopped, ran his hands through his hair, and tried a different approach. "Look, Rebecca, I'll be honest. I'm in trouble. The business is struggling more than Dad knows. I've borrowed against everything, including the kids' college funds. I need this inheritance to save my family's future." For a moment, I felt sympathy for him. Then I remembered Uncle Theo's words about integrity, about seeing people clearly rather than through the lens of wishful thinking. "I'm sorry you're having financial problems," I said. "But that doesn't give you the right to Uncle Theo's estate. He made his choice based on who he trusted, who cared for him, and who he believed would honor his legacy. If you'd been there for him instead of planning how to profit from his death, maybe his choice would have been different. Marcus's conciliatory mask slipped. "You self-righteous bitch," he snarled. "You think you're so much better than us, so much more deserving. But you're just a gold digger with better PR. Get out of my house," I said, standing up. "Gladly," he replied, heading for the door. "But this isn't over. We'll get what's rightfully ours, one way or another." The threat in his voice chilled me, but it also strengthened my resolve. Uncle Theo had been right to protect me from them. They saw his death as their opportunity, not their loss. 3 days later, I discovered what Marcus meant by one way or another. I came home from grocery shopping to find my front door standing open and my alarm system disabled. Heart pounding, I called the police and waited in my car until officers arrived. The house had been ransacked, but strangely, nothing appeared to be missing. Electronics, artwork, jewelry, everything valuable was still in place. What had been disturbed were Uncle Theo's papers, his desk drawers, his filing cabinets. Someone had been looking for something specific. Detective Sarah Rodriguez, who handled the break-in, was thorough in her investigation. "Do you have any idea what someone might have been looking for?" she asked as we surveyed the study. "Probably the recordings I found," I admitted, explaining about the secret drawer and the audio evidence. "But I turned copies over to my attorney weeks ago. The originals are in a safety deposit box. Any suspicions about who might have done this?" I hesitated, then decided honesty was the best approach. "My siblings are contesting my uncle's will. They've been increasingly desperate as their case has weakened. But I can't prove they were involved." Detective Rodriguez took notes and dusted for fingerprints, but whoever had searched the house had been careful. No obvious evidence was left behind. However, the break-in served one purpose. It proved that my siblings were willing to escalate beyond legal channels. Ms. Morrison filed an emergency motion with the court, arguing that the break-in was clearly related to the estate dispute and demonstrated bad faith on my siblings' part. She requested increased security measures and expedited resolution of the case. The judge, an elderly woman named Helen Fairchild who had known Uncle Theo personally, was not amused by the implications of criminal activity surrounding the estate dispute. She ordered all parties to appear for an immediate hearing and made it clear that any further harassment would result in sanctions. At the hearing, Marcus and Vivian denied any involvement in the break-in, claiming it was probably random vandalism. Their attorney, Richard Harrison, suggested I had staged the incident to gain sympathy. But Judge Fairchild seemed skeptical of their denials. "Mr. and Ms. Whitmore," she said sternly, "your case relies heavily on claims that your sister manipulated your uncle through constant contact and presence. Yet now we have evidence that you yourselves were pressuring him for years to change his will in your favor, that you discussed contesting his wishes before he died, and that someone has illegally entered your sister's home looking for evidence related to this dispute. This does not paint a picture of grieving relatives seeking justice." She granted Ms. Morrison's motion for expedited resolution and scheduled a final hearing for the following month. "I want this matter resolved quickly and definitively," Judge Fairchild announced. "These kinds of family disputes are exactly what proper estate planning is designed to prevent." As we left the courthouse, I felt cautiously optimistic for the first time in months. But my siblings weren't done fighting. That evening, Vivian called me directly. "You think you've won," she said without preamble, "but you haven't. Even if you keep the house, you'll never have a family. Marcus and I will make sure of that. Mom and Dad already think you're being greedy. Your cousins are talking about how you manipulated a sick old man. You'll have your precious mansion, but you'll have it alone. I'd rather be alone with my integrity than surrounded by people who only love me when I give them what they want," I replied. "Integrity doesn't keep you warm at night," Vivian shot back. "And it won't matter when you're old and need family to care for you, like Uncle Theo did." "Uncle Theo had someone who cared for him," I said quietly. "He had me. Because I loved him, not because I hoped to inherit from him. That's the difference between us, Vivian. I know how to love without expecting payment." She hung up without another word. The final hearing took place on a snowy Thursday in December. The courtroom was packed with curious townspeople who had followed the case through local newspaper coverage. My parents sat in the back row, their faces carefully neutral. Extended family members filled other seats, most of them clearly supporting Marcus and Vivian based on their whispered conversations. Harrison, Bradley, and associates presented their case first, arguing that Uncle Theo's mental state had been compromised by pain medication and grief, making him vulnerable to my manipulation. They called his oncologist, Dr. Patricia Williams, who testified that patients facing terminal diagnoses often experience depression and anxiety that can affect judgment. Is it possible, Richard Harrison asked, that Theodore Whitmore's decision-making capacity was impaired during his final months? It's possible, Dr. Williams replied carefully. Cancer patients often struggle with cognitive effects from both the disease and its treatment. But on cross-examination, Ms. Morrison revealed that Dr. Williams had noted in Uncle Theo's medical records that his mental acuity remained sharp throughout his illness. In fact, didn't you note that Mr. Whitmore insisted on reviewing and understanding every treatment option, that he asked detailed questions about side effects, and that he demonstrated clear capacity for complex decision-making right up until his final weeks? Yes, Dr. Williams admitted. Theodore was remarkably lucid for someone in his condition. Harrison, Bradley, and associates then called Marcus and Vivian to testify about their relationship with Uncle Theo. Both presented themselves as loving relatives who had been shocked by his final will. They claimed their recorded conversations had been misunderstood, that they had only wanted to ensure Uncle Theo received proper care and had appropriate estate planning. Rebecca isolated him from his family, Vivian testified, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. She convinced him that we didn't care about him, when really we were just respecting his privacy and independence. How often did you visit your uncle during his final year? Ms. Morrison asked on cross-examination. We visited as often as we could, Vivian replied evasively. According to your uncle's calendar, which he meticulously maintained, you visited him 6 times during his final year. Rebecca visited him 43 times. Do you consider 6 visits in 12 months to be as often as you could? I have a job and responsibilities, Vivian said defensively. So does Rebecca. Yet, she managed to visit far more frequently and took leave from work to care for your uncle during his final months. Why didn't you? Vivian had no good answer. When it was our turn to present evidence, Ms. Morrison methodically dismantled my siblings' claims. She played selected portions of the recordings, showing how Marcus and Vivian had pressured Uncle Theo for money over the years while expressing no genuine concern for his well-being. She presented Uncle Theo's detailed documentation of our relationship, including photos of me caring for him, copies of thoughtful cards I'd sent, and records of our long phone conversations about books and art. Most powerful was Uncle Theo's own written explanation of his decision, which Ms. Morrison read aloud in court. Rebecca alone among my relatives has shown me genuine love and care, not because she hoped to inherit from me, but because she values our relationship for its own sake. During my illness, she has been my companion, my advocate, and my comfort. She has asked for nothing while giving everything. This is why I entrust her with my legacy, not because she is perfect, but because she is genuine in her affection and will honor the values that have guided my life. I took the witness stand last, speaking from my heart about my relationship with Uncle Theo. I described our Sunday afternoons in his library, his guidance during my college years, his excitement about my museum career, and his grace during his final illness. Did you ever ask your uncle to leave you anything in his will? Ms. Morrison asked. Never, I replied. The subject made him uncomfortable when my siblings brought it up, so I avoided it entirely. I assumed he would leave most of his estate to charity, as he'd sometimes mentioned. I was completely shocked to learn about his decision. What did your relationship with your uncle mean to you? Everything, I said, my voice breaking slightly. He was my mentor, my friend, and the one person in my family who truly understood me. I would have cared for him exactly the same way even if I'd known he was leaving me nothing. That's what love is, caring without conditions or expectations. The cross-examination was brutal. Richard Harrison tried to paint me as calculating and manipulative, suggesting I had deliberately distanced Uncle Theo from his other relatives to ensure my own inheritance. But I held firm, answering honestly and letting Uncle Theo's own words and documentation speak for themselves. Judge Fairchild retired to consider the evidence, returning an hour later with her decision. The courtroom was silent as she spoke. This case represents everything that can go wrong when grief and greed intersect. I have reviewed the evidence carefully, including the audio recordings, medical testimony, and extensive documentation provided by the decedent himself. While I understand that the contestants feel their inheritance was unfair, the law does not require a testator to distribute his estate equally among relatives. The evidence shows that Theodore Whitmore was mentally competent when he executed his final will, that he understood the nature and extent of his property, and that he made his decision based on his assessment of who had shown him genuine care and affection. The recordings demonstrate that the contestants had financial motives for wanting to inherit, while the respondents' motives were purely compassionate. Most significantly, the decedent himself anticipated this challenge and took extraordinary steps to document his reasoning and protect his chosen beneficiary. His wishes are clear, legally valid, and will be honored by this court. The contest is dismissed with prejudice. The gavel's bang echoed through the silent courtroom. I had won, but the victory felt hollow amid the wreckage of family relationships. Marcus and Vivian stormed out without looking at me. My parents approached hesitantly, my mother reaching out as if to hug me before stopping uncertainly. Rebecca, she began, I hope this can all be put behind us now. Maybe we can work on healing as a family. I hope so too, Mom, I replied. But that will require acknowledging that I was right to honor Uncle Theo's wishes, not demanding that I apologize for receiving what he wanted me to have. She nodded sadly, understanding that our relationship had been fundamentally changed by their failure to support me during the most difficult period of my life. Outside the courthouse, Ms. Morrison congratulated me on our victory, but warned that my siblings might attempt an appeal. Estate contests can drag on for years if people are determined enough, she cautioned. Make sure you're prepared for the possibility. But no appeal came. Perhaps Marcus and Vivian finally realized that their case was hopeless, or perhaps they simply ran out of money for legal fees. Within 6 months, the estate was fully settled, and I was the undisputed owner of Uncle Theo's mansion and investments. The aftermath was bittersweet. I returned to work at the Metropolitan Museum, but requested a transfer to their Connecticut satellite office, wanting to be closer to Uncle Theo's house and the community he had loved. I spent weekends restoring the mansion to its former glory, hiring local craftsmen to repair years of deferred maintenance while preserving its historic character. The Tower Library remained exactly as Uncle Theo had left it, a shrine to our shared love of books and learning. I added my own touches gradually, contemporary art that complemented the Victorian architecture, modern amenities that enhanced comfort without compromising the home's historic integrity. My relationship with Marcus and Vivian never recovered. They moved forward with their lives as if I no longer existed, a silence that was both painful and liberating. At family gatherings I no longer attended, I heard through mutual friends that they portrayed themselves as the victims of my greed and manipulation. The narrative they created painted me as the villain who had stolen their rightful inheritance through cunning and deceit. My parents struggled to navigate the new family dynamic. They maintained superficial contact with me, birthday cards, holiday texts, occasional awkward phone calls, but our relationship lacked the warmth it had once held. They had chosen sides during the crisis, and though they never said it directly, their silence during my siblings' attacks spoke louder than words ever could. The isolation might have been devastating if not for the unexpected community I found among Uncle Theo's friends and neighbors. Eleanor Hutchins, an elderly woman who lived 3 houses down, became a surrogate grandmother. She had been Uncle Theo's friend for 30 years and shared stories about his generosity and quiet kindness that even I hadn't known. Your uncle helped my late husband through his final illness, she told me one afternoon as we shared tea in her garden. Never asked for thanks, never made a show of it. Just showed up every day with groceries, books, whatever we needed. That's the kind of man he was, measured not by what he accumulated, but by what he gave away. Through Eleanor, I met others who had been touched by Uncle Theo's generosity. The local historical society revealed that he had anonymously funded the restoration of several historic buildings in town. The library disclosed that their rare book collection existed because of his donations. Even the fire department had received a substantial gift from him after their station was damaged in a storm. Learning about these acts of quiet philanthropy helped me understand why Uncle Theo had entrusted me with his legacy. He hadn't been hoarding wealth for its own sake. He had been stewarding resources to make a positive impact. Now that responsibility was mine. I established the Theodore Whitmore Foundation for Historic Preservation, using a portion of the investment portfolio to fund restoration projects throughout New England. The foundation's first major project was renovating the town's original schoolhouse, turning it into a community center for local arts and education programs. The work gave me purpose beyond my museum career and connected me to Uncle Theo's values in a tangible way. Each restored building, each preserved piece of history, felt like a conversation with him about what truly mattered. I could almost hear his voice encouraging me to think beyond myself, to use privilege and resources to benefit others. 2 years after the will contest ended, I received an unexpected visitor. Detective Rodriguez appeared at my door on a crisp October morning, her expression serious, but not alarming. "I wanted to update you on the break-in investigation," she said as I invited her in for coffee. "We finally caught a break in the case." It turned out that Tyler, Vivian's ex-husband, had been arrested for burglary in a neighboring town. During questioning, he confessed to breaking into my house, hoping to find documents he could sell to Marcus and Vivian. The couple had offered him $10,000 for anything that might help their legal case, though they later denied this when Tyler was arrested. "Will you be pressing charges?" Detective Rodriguez asked. I considered the question carefully. Tyler was clearly desperate, a man whose life had spiraled into petty crime and desperation. Sending him to prison would accomplish nothing positive, while the revelation of Marcus and Vivian's involvement was justice enough. "No," I decided. "But I want this information documented in case they try anything else." The detective nodded approvingly. "Sometimes mercy is the strongest response," she said. "Your uncle would be proud of that decision." Her words stayed with me long after she left. Uncle Theo had taught me about integrity, but he had also modeled forgiveness and compassion. Even toward Marcus and Vivian, who had caused him pain in his final months, he had never spoken with true hatred, only disappointment. As the 3rd anniversary of Uncle Theo's death approached, I made a decision that surprised even me. I sent letters to Marcus and Vivian, not apologizing for keeping my inheritance, but expressing hope that we might someday find a way past our conflict. I shared memories of Uncle Theo's kindness, his lessons about family, and my desire to honor his memory by healing the divisions that had grown between us. Vivian never responded. Marcus sent a brief, cold reply stating that he had no interest in reconciliation unless I was prepared to make things right financially. His continued focus on money rather than relationship confirmed that Uncle Theo's assessment of our character differences had been accurate. But the act of reaching out, even unsuccessfully, felt important. Uncle Theo had always said that we can only control our own actions, not others' responses. I had tried to build a bridge. If they chose not to cross it, that was their decision, not my failure. The mansion continued to be my sanctuary and my responsibility. I opened it for historical society tours, sharing Uncle Theo's story and the home's architectural significance with visitors. Children from local schools came for educational programs, their excitement about the Tower Library and hidden passages reminding me of my own childhood wonder. During one such tour, a young girl named Sarah lingered behind after her class had moved on. She was perhaps 8 years old, with serious dark eyes and an obvious love for books. "Did you really inherit all this just because you were nice to your uncle?" she asked, her directness both surprising and refreshing. "I inherited it because I loved him," I corrected gently. "Not because I was trying to get something from him, but because he was important to me as a person." She nodded thoughtfully. "My grandmother lives with us, and my mom says taking care of old people is hard work. But I like reading to Grandma and hearing her stories." "That sounds like love," I said, remembering my own conversations with Uncle Theo. The hard work doesn't matter when you genuinely care about someone. Sarah's question made me realize that Uncle Theo's story, and mine, had become something larger than a simple inheritance dispute. It was a lesson about the difference between loving people and loving what they can give you, between genuine care and calculated kindness. I began speaking at estate planning seminars, sharing my experience to help other families avoid similar conflicts. The message was always the same: clear communication, honest documentation, and understanding that love cannot be measured in dollars or demanded by blood relation alone. These speaking engagements led to writing opportunities. I contributed articles to legal journals about family dynamics in estate disputes, and eventually wrote a book about Uncle Theo's life and the lessons he taught me about integrity, compassion, and authentic relationships. The book's success brought unexpected recognition and financial opportunities, but more importantly, it brought letters from readers who had experienced similar family conflicts. Many were adult children who had cared for aging parents only to face resentment from siblings who felt entitled to equal inheritance despite unequal effort and care. Others were like Uncle Theo, older adults who wanted to leave their estates to people who had shown genuine love rather than those who merely shared DNA. My story gave them courage to document their wishes clearly and plan for potential conflicts. One particularly moving letter came from a woman named Catherine, whose situation eerily mirrored my own. My aunt left me her home after I cared for her through Alzheimer's disease. My cousins contested the will, claiming I had manipulated her. The legal battle lasted 3 years and nearly bankrupted me emotionally and financially. Reading your story helped me understand that I wasn't wrong to accept what she wanted to give me, even though others disagreed with her choice. Thank you for showing me that sometimes the family who chooses us is more valuable than the family we're born into. Letters like Catherine's reminded me why sharing my story mattered. Uncle Theo's legacy wasn't just the mansion or the money, it was the example he set of living with integrity and choosing love over obligation. 5 years after inheriting the estate, I made another significant decision. I converted the mansion's east wing into apartments for elderly residents who needed assistance, but wanted to maintain their independence. The Theodore Whitmore Senior Community offered elegant, accessible housing with optional services and a beautiful setting for aging gracefully. Eleanor Hutchins became my first resident, moving into a sunny 2-bedroom apartment overlooking Uncle Theo's beloved garden. Other neighbors followed, creating a small community of seniors who supported each other while maintaining their autonomy. The project required significant renovation and ongoing financial commitment, but using Uncle Theo's legacy to care for others felt like the perfect way to honor his memory. He had believed that true wealth came from using resources to improve lives, not from hoarding them for personal gain. My romantic life had remained on hold during the years of legal battles and estate management, but as the senior community became established, I found myself ready to open my heart again. David Chin, the architect who had designed the senior community renovations, had become a close friend during the project. Our shared passion for historic preservation and community service created a foundation for deeper connection. David understood my commitment to Uncle Theo's legacy and my complex relationship with my birth family. He had experienced his own family conflicts when he chose architecture over his parents' expectations for a medical career, and he respected the boundaries I had established with Marcus and Vivian. Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared values rather than desperate loneliness or immediate attraction. When he proposed on the mansion's front porch where Uncle Theo and I had shared so many conversations, it felt like a continuation of the love story Uncle Theo had begun, rather than a replacement for it. We married in the mansion's garden on a beautiful September afternoon, surrounded by chosen family, Eleanor, the other senior community residents, colleagues from the museum, and friends who had supported me through the difficult years. My parents attended, their presence cordial but distant. Marcus and Vivian were notably absent, having declined their invitations without explanation. The wedding photographer captured a moment that perfectly symbolized the day, David and me cutting our cake while Eleanor and the other residents cheered from the mansion's grand porch. It was a celebration not just of our union, but of the community we had built from love rather than obligation. Uncle Theo's portrait watched over the festivities from its place of honor in the foyer, his kind eyes seeming to approve of how his legacy was being continued. I had kept my promise to honor his memory, using his gift not just for personal benefit, but to create something meaningful that would outlast us both. As the reception wound down and guests began to leave, David and I stood together in the Tower Library where my relationship with Uncle Theo had been nurtured. Surrounded by thousands of books that represented decades of learning and growth, I felt the presence of all the love that had brought me to this moment. "Do you think he would approve?" David asked, gesturing toward Uncle Theo's favorite reading chair. "I think he would be proud," I replied, remembering his words about integrity being the one thing no one could take from you. Not just of what we've accomplished, but of how we've chosen to live. With honesty, compassion, and commitment to something larger than ourselves. 7 years after Uncle Theo's death, I still lived in his mansion, but it was no longer a museum to the past. It was a thriving community where elderly residents found dignity and support, where children learned about history and literature, where David and I were building our own family legacy. The legal victory over Marcus and Vivian had been important, but it wasn't the real triumph. The real victory was in proving Uncle Theo right, that love given freely, without expectation of return, creates something beautiful that extends far beyond the original gift. My siblings had seen his death as their opportunity to claim what they felt entitled to. I had seen it as a responsibility to carry forward the values he had lived by. The difference between those perspectives had determined not just the legal outcome, but the shape of all our lives afterward. If there's one lesson I want to share with anyone facing similar family conflicts, it's this: inheritance isn't just about money or property. It's about values, relationships, and the kind of person you choose to be when facing difficult circumstances. The true measure of any legacy isn't what you receive, but what you do with what you've been given. Marcus and Vivian received exactly what Uncle Theo thought they deserved, gifts proportionate to the love and care they had shown him. They could have accepted his decision with grace, honored his memory, and worked to rebuild the family relationships that their greed had damaged. Instead, they chose legal warfare, deception, and, ultimately, permanent estrangement from me and from the values Uncle Theo had tried to teach all of us. I received more than I ever expected, but with it came the responsibility to prove worthy of Uncle Theo's trust. Every decision I made with his legacy, from defending his will to creating the senior community to establishing the foundation, was shaped by the question, what would Uncle Theo want me to do? That question guided me through the darkest moments of family conflict and continues to guide me as David and I build our life together. Uncle Theo's greatest gift wasn't the mansion or the money, it was the example he set of living with integrity, choosing love over convenience, and using whatever resources you have to make the world a little bit better. The mansion still stands on Maple Hill, its Victorian elegance preserved for future generations. The Tower Library still holds thousands of books, now supplemented by the stories and wisdom of the seniors who call it home. Uncle Theo's portrait still watches over the grand foyer, and his memory still guides every decision we make about his legacy. But perhaps most importantly, the love he showed me, unconditional, generous, and transformative, lives on in how I treat others, how David and I are raising our daughter, and how the Theodore Whitmore Senior Community operates as a place where elderly residents are valued for who they are, not what they can provide. In the end, Marcus and Vivian were wrong about what Uncle Theo's death represented. It wasn't the end of his influence on his family, it was the beginning of its truest expression. Through me, through our work, and through everyone whose life is touched by the community we've built, Uncle Theo's values continue to shape the world. Sometimes at night, as I tuck my daughter into bed in the room that was once Uncle Theo's study, I tell her stories about her great-uncle, his kindness, his wisdom, and his belief that the most important things in life can't be bought or inherited, only chosen and lived. "Will I inherit the house someday, Mommy?" she asks, her young mind trying to understand the complex legacy she's been born into. "Maybe," I tell her. "But houses and money aren't the real inheritance. The real inheritance is knowing how to love people well, how to stand up for what's right even when it's difficult, and how to use whatever gifts you have to help others. That's what Great Uncle Theo really left us, and that's what we'll pass on to you. She nods seriously, already wise beyond her years, and I see in her eyes the same thoughtfulness that Uncle Theo valued in me all those years ago. The cycle continues, not of property and wealth, but of values and love freely given. And somewhere, I believe Uncle Theo is smiling, knowing that his greatest investment, in a quiet little girl who loved books and needed someone to believe in her, has paid dividends he never could have imagined. Have you ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours while family members questioned your motives? Have you experienced the pain of realizing that some people only value relationships for what they can gain from them? Share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Your support helps me continue sharing these important lessons about family, integrity, and the true meaning of inheritance. Remember, the most valuable things in life aren't things at all. They're the relationships we nurture, the values we uphold, and the love we choose to give without expecting anything in return. Thank you for being part of this journey with me.